If someone had told me that at 67 years old, my life would pivot on a single dinner invitation, I would have offered them a kind smile, perhaps a cup of tea, and dismissed it as a sweet fantasy. My world, since my beloved husband Frank passed 5 years ago, had become a quiet one. It hadn't shrunk, not really, rather, it had condensed, becoming richer in memory what it had lost in company. My life was measured in small, deliberate comforts. The precise way the morning sun slanted through the living room window, warming the worn velvet of Frank's favorite armchair. The scent of old paper and dried lavender that clung to my collection of books, and the quiet, resilient life of the tomato plants I tended on my small balcony, their steadfast growth a daily reassurance. And, of course, the central pillar of that world was the boundless love I held for my only son, Liam. But love, I've learned, is much like a garden. It requires constant, careful tending. And if you're not vigilant, thorny weeds can take root in the most unexpected places. In the garden of my life, that invasive, choking weed had a name: Amanda, my daughter-in-law. If you're listening to this, perhaps from a comfortable chair in your own quiet corner of the world, please consider subscribing and let me know where you're watching from. Because this isn't just a story about a dinner. It's a story about the deafening silence of a love that's lost its voice, about the chasm that can open between a mother and son. It's a story about how a cruel whisper, uttered in a place of glittering chandeliers and false smiles, can attempt to shatter a heart, and how the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried under layers of wealth and pretense, will always, always find its way to the light. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in Frank's armchair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me, watching the rain trace hesitant paths down the window pane. The ring from my old cream-colored landline telephone was a jarring sound in the stillness. I already knew who it was. Liam was the only one who ever called this number. It was our special line, a relic from his childhood that he'd never quite given up. "Mom, how are you?" His voice had that tight, careful tone I'd grown to recognize, the one he always used when Amanda was nearby. A vocal tightrope walk between the son he was and the husband he was expected to be. "I'm well, dear. Just watching the rain. Is everything all right?" I kept my voice light, a practiced casualness designed to put him at ease. "Yeah, listen, Amanda and I wanted to take you out to dinner this Saturday." He rushed the words out, as if they might escape him if he hesitated. To celebrate your birthday, a little late." A fragile, treacherous hope fluttered in my chest. My birthday had passed 2 weeks ago. I'd spent the day quietly, rereading some of Frank's old letters and baking myself a small lemon cake. My only acknowledgement from Liam and Amanda had been a perfunctory, 5-word text message late in the evening, clearly dictated by Amanda: "Happy birthday. Hope it's good." Ever since Liam had married into Amanda's world, a world of corporate mergers, weekend trips to Aspen, and cars that cost more than my entire apartment, I'd felt myself becoming a footnote in my own son's story. Amanda treated my life not with malice, but with a far more wounding emotion: indifference. To her, I was an artifact from a past he needed to outgrow. My stories about the bakery Frank and I poured our souls into, the rolling pin, were met with polite, vacant smiles. She'd once picked up a photograph of Frank and me, covered in flour and laughing, and said, "How rustic." It wasn't a compliment. I remembered the first time she'd visited my apartment, shortly after they were engaged. She had stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning my collection of mismatched, beloved furniture, the scuffed wooden floors, the quilt I'd spent a winter knitting. "It's very cozy," she'd said, and the way she said the word cozy made it sound like a terminal illness. "Oh?" I said into the phone, that memory a fresh sting. "Well, that's a lovely thought, dear. Where are we going?" Liam's hesitation was a tangible thing, a silence that stretched across the phone line. "Le ciel étoilé." I almost dropped the receiver. The starry sky. The name alone was a symbol of a world I did not belong to. It was a place of whispered transactions and celebrity sightings, a fortress of culinary extravagance. A single appetizer there cost what I spent on groceries for a week. Frank and I used to pass it on our anniversary walks, peering through the polished glass at the beautiful people inside. "Someday, Ellie," he'd squeeze my hand. "When our ship comes in, I'll take you there and we'll order one of everything." Our ship never came in, but we had each other, and that was always more than enough. "My goodness, Liam," I finally managed to say, my voice a whisper. "That place, it's so much. I don't think I have anything to wear. It's not for me." "It's fine, Mom," he cut in, his voice hurried, almost pleading. I could practically hear Amanda in the background, a silent, powerful presence. "Amanda insists. She said you deserve the best." He paused. 7 o'clock on Saturday, and, wear your best dress, okay? You deserve the best." The words, coming from Amanda's direction, felt like a beautifully wrapped box with a venomous snake inside. She had never thought I deserved anything but to be kept at a respectable distance, an inconvenient relic of Liam's humble past. I knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in my stomach, that this wasn't an olive branch, this was a performance, and I was to be the main attraction in a play about my own inadequacy. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to protect my heart, to stay in the safety of my quiet world. But then I thought of Liam. I saw his face in my mind, the way his eyes seemed to carry a constant, low-level apology. He was caught in a trap he didn't know how to escape, and my refusal would only make it worse for him. My love for my son was a fierce, primal thing, and it made me willing to walk into the lion's den even if I knew I would be devoured. I still held on to that foolish maternal flicker of hope that if I just showed up, if I played my part, maybe I could build a bridge, however fragile, across the chasm that had opened between us. "All right, dear," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "That sounds wonderful. I'll be there." As I hung up the phone, the silence of my apartment felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, charged with the foreboding of the evening to come. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the photo Amanda had once called rustic. It was Frank and me on the day we opened the bakery. We were young, exhausted, and happier than I've ever been since. His arm was around me. His smile was wide and genuine. "Oh, Frank," I whispered to the photograph. "I'm going to our restaurant, but I have to go alone." And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was not going for a celebration. I was going to battle. The days leading up to that Saturday dinner were a special kind of torment, a slow march toward an execution I had willingly agreed to. The invitation sat in my mind like an unexploded bomb, ticking down the hours. My small apartment, usually a sanctuary of peaceful solitude, suddenly felt like a cage. Every object I looked at seemed to mock my inadequacy for the world I was about to enter. The simple, sturdy wooden table, where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals, the slightly faded floral print curtains I had sewn myself, the chipped ceramic mug that was my favorite. They were all symbols of a life lived with love, not luxury, a life that Amanda saw as a failure. My main source of anxiety, however, was my wardrobe. Liam's parting words, "Wear your best dress," echoed in my head. What exactly constituted my best? I opened my closet door at least a dozen times a day, staring at the modest collection of clothes hanging inside. They were a history of my life in fabric. There was the navy blue suit I had worn to Frank's funeral, its shoulders still holding the ghost of my grief. There was the cheerful sundress I'd bought for a neighbor's granddaughter's christening. There was a collection of sensible blouses and comfortable cardigans that made up my daily uniform. They were all perfectly fine for my life, but for les ciels étoilés, they felt like a peasant's rags before a king. I remembered a conversation with Amanda from a few years ago. She had been showing me photos from a charity gala. She was draped in a shimmering silver gown that she mentioned cost more than a used car. I had naively said, "It's beautiful, dear." It reminds me a little of the dress my mother made for her own wedding. Amanda had given me a tight, pitying smile and said, "Eleanor, this isn't homemade. This is couture." She said the word homemade as if it were a contagion. That memory propelled me out of my apartment and onto a bus heading downtown. I couldn't afford a new dress, not a real one, but perhaps I could find something at a consignment shop, a place where other people's discarded glamour might become my armor. I spent hours sifting through racks of clothes, the scent of mothballs and forgotten perfumes clinging to the air. I felt a profound sense of shame, an imposter trying on lives that weren't hers. Finally, in a small, dusty shop tucked away on a side street, I found it. It was a simple, long-sleeved dress made of a deep, plum-colored silk. It had no flashy beads or sequins, just an elegant cut and a quiet grace. The tag indicated it was from a designer I'd never heard of, and it had been marked down 3 times. It cost $80, a painful extravagance that would mean eating nothing but soup for the rest of the month. But as I looked at my reflection in the tarnished mirror, I saw a woman who looked respectable, dignified. I bought it. On the evening of the dinner, I began my preparations hours in advance. I did my own hair, trying to coax my silvery waves into an elegant twist at the nape of my neck, but my trembling fingers betrayed my nerves. I applied a touch of makeup, a whisper of lipstick, a hint of blush, trying to add a little color to a face that felt pale with dread. When I finally slipped on the plum silk dress, it felt less like armor and more like a costume. I was playing the part of someone I wasn't, a woman who belonged at Le Ciel Étoilé. I decided to leave early, to walk the final few blocks to give myself time to compose my thoughts. The bus ride was a blur of anonymous faces. As I got off and the cool night air hit my face, my resolve wavered. I could just turn around, go home, and put on my comfortable old robe. I could call Liam and feign a headache. The thought was so tempting, a sweet siren song of safety and self-preservation. But then I pictured Liam's disappointed, worried face, and I knew I couldn't. For my son, I would face the lions. As I stood before the restaurant, my heart pounded against my ribs. Le Ciel Étoilé was even more imposing in person. Its polished brass doors gleamed under the soft glow of gas lamps, and a doorman in a crisp, dark uniform stood sentinel. He gave me a brief, dismissive glance as I approached, his eyes cataloging my simple coat and lack of a chauffeured car, before turning his attention to a sleek, black sedan pulling up to the curb. For a moment, I was invisible. It was a fitting prelude to the evening. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I pushed open one of the heavy doors and stepped inside. The transition was jarring. From the quiet chill of the street, I was plunged into a world of warmth, light, and sound. A colossal crystal chandelier, dripping with what seemed like 1,000 points of light, dominated the high ceiling. The air hummed with the sophisticated murmur of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of heavy silverware against fine china and the gentle, cascading notes of a grand piano. I saw them immediately. They were seated at what was undeniably the best table in the house, a plush, semicircular booth beside a massive paned glass window that overlooked an exquisitely lit garden. Amanda was a vision in a stark, black, form-fitting dress, a string of pearls at her throat. She was laughing at something the man beside her said, a practiced, theatrical laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. The man was my son. Liam looked handsome in a tailored suit, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the forced quality of his smile. He saw me first. His smile faltered for a second before he composed himself, stood, and walked over to me. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. The gesture felt rehearsed. "You made it." "Hello, dear," I smiled, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Amanda did not stand. She merely turned her head, her gaze sweeping over me in a slow, critical appraisal. I saw her eyes linger for a moment on my simple dress, before a tiny, triumphant smirk touched the corners of her lips. "Eleanor, I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "It wasn't so hard to find," I replied, allowing Liam to guide me to the seat opposite her. The plush velvet of the booth felt like a judge's bench. The dinner began with a stilted, excruciating conversation that was more of a monologue from Amanda. She spoke of their upcoming ski trip to Switzerland, the new German sports car she'd just purchased, and a spat she was having with the board of a charity she chaired. It was a verbal parade of their wealth, each sentence designed to highlight the vast, unbridgeable gulf between her life and mine. I sat there, nodding and murmuring polite affirmations, feeling myself shrink with every word. The true performance, however, began when the waiter arrived. His name tag read Marco. He was young, handsome in a slick commercial way, with perfectly coiffed hair and an air of practiced arrogance. He approached the table with a theatrical flourish and bowed slightly toward Amanda. "Miss Whitman," he purred, his voice dripping with a sycophancy that was clearly reserved for the highest bidders. "Your usual champagne aperitif?" "Of course, Marco. The best you have," she said, waving a dismissive hand. Then she turned her gaze to me, her eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "And for you, Eleanor? What will it be? Oh, but I'm forgetting. You're probably more of a teabag sort of person, aren't you?" The heat of shame crept up my neck. "A glass of still water would be lovely, thank you." Marco glanced at me, and in that fleeting look, I saw a universe of judgment. He saw my age, my simple dress, my unmanicured hands. He registered me not as a guest, but as an obligation. He didn't write down my request. With another fawning nod to Amanda, he spun on his heel and walked away. Moments later, he returned, carrying a single, fluted glass of bubbling champagne on a silver tray, which he presented to Amanda as if it were a crown jewel. He placed it before her and then simply stood there, ignoring me completely. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I believe I asked for a glass of water." Marco turned to me slowly, his expression one of bored impatience. "My apologies, madam," he said, the word madam sounding like an insult. "I must prioritize the needs of our regular patrons first." Amanda let out a small, sharp laugh, like the tinkling of broken glass. Liam stared intently at the intricate pattern on his bread plate, his silence a deafening roar in my ears. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that this was only the beginning. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from a shout, but from a whisper. A shout is honest, a direct assault. But a whisper is a conspiracy. It's the shared glance, the subtle sneer, the quiet, deliberate act of making someone feel that they are less than nothing. For the next 20 minutes, I was the subject of that conspiracy. I was a ghost at my own son's table. Marco, the waiter, moved around us with the choreographed grace of a dancer, his entire focus a laser beam pointed at Amanda. He refilled her champagne flute before it was empty. He described the evening's specials to her in breathless, poetic detail, his voice a low, intimate murmur. He inquired about her father's golf game. He laughed at her brittle, unfunny jokes. To me, he offered nothing. Not a glance, not a menu, not the glass of water I had requested. I was a void, a vacuum at the edge of Amanda's glittering universe. I tried, at first, to assert my presence. When he returned to take their order, I cleared my throat softly. "Excuse me," I began. "I haven't been given a menu." Marco paused, turning to me with an expression of profound irritation, as if I were a fly buzzing in his ear. Amanda answered for him. "Oh, Eleanor, don't be difficult. The menu is overwhelming for someone unaccustomed. I'll just order for you. You'll have the chicken. It's the simplest thing they make." She said the word simplest with the same tone one might use for a child's meal. She then turned back to Marco, dismissing me completely. "I'll have the Wagyu beef, medium rare, and a bottle of the 2098 Cheval Blanc." I watched my son Liam. I searched his face for a flicker of protest, a sign that the man I had raised was still in there. He was looking down, meticulously applying butter to a piece of bread, his knuckles white as he gripped the small silver knife. He was a prisoner, and his silence was the bars of his cage. He was so terrified of upsetting the delicate, volatile ecosystem of his marriage that he was willing to sacrifice his own mother on its altar. The pain of that realization was a physical blow, sharper and deeper than any insult Amanda could ever devise. The true nadir, the moment that would be seared into my memory forever, arrived with a clumsy, simple accident. As I reached for my napkin, my hand, trembling slightly, brushed against my empty water goblet. It tipped over with a soft, dull thud onto the plush white tablecloth. It was empty, so it made no mess, only a sound. But Amanda reacted as if I had detonated a bomb. "For heaven's sake, Eleanor!" she exclaimed, her voice sharp and loud enough to turn the heads of the couple at the neighboring table. "Can you not go 5 minutes without causing a scene? This is a fine dining establishment, not a cafeteria." Marco rushed over, his face a mask of theatrical horror. He didn't look at me or ask if I was all right. His eyes were fixed on the upturned glass as if it were a venomous snake. He produced a small silver crumb scraper from his pocket and with an air of extreme reluctance used it to nudge the glass back into an upright position, careful not to let his skin touch it. "My sincerest apologies for the disturbance, Miss Whitman," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. My entire body was on fire with a shame so profound it felt like it might consume me. I looked at Liam, a silent, desperate plea in my eyes. "Say something, please. Defend me. Be my son." He met my gaze for a fleeting second, and in his eyes I saw not anger, but fear, pure, unadulterated fear of his wife. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then he closed it, shaking his head slightly before looking away, defeated. And that was when Amanda decided to deliver the killing blow. She was done with the subtle torment. It was time for the final, public execution. She beckoned Marco closer with a flick of her fingers. He leaned in conspiratorially, his ear close to her lips. She didn't whisper. She spoke in a low, clear stage whisper, a voice calibrated with surgical precision to be heard by me, by the tables nearby, and perhaps by God himself. "Listen to me, Marco," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "From now on, just ignore that old woman completely. She's poor. She's only here because we felt sorry for her. Don't waste your time or your energy. As far as you're concerned, this seat," and here she gestured vaguely in my direction with a wave of her diamond-laden hand, "is empty." Time stopped. The distant notes of the piano, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a roaring silence in my ears. The only thing that existed was her voice, her words, hanging in the air between us like a toxic cloud. "Ignore her. She's poor. The seat is empty." Marco straightened up. He looked directly at me, and this time there was no pretense, no subtle disdain. His lips curled into a slow, cruel smirk. It was a look of pure contempt, a shared joke between him and Amanda at my expense. He held my gaze for a moment, his eyes filled with derision, and then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Amanda. The conspiracy was complete. Then he turned his back on me and walked away. I sat there, frozen in my chair, feeling the weight of 100 invisible eyes on me. I felt stripped bare, my dignity shredded, and left in pieces on the expensive Persian rug. I was no longer Eleanor Vance. I was a non-entity, an empty chair, a ghost haunting a feast I was never meant to attend. I thought of Frank, of our little bakery, of a life built on the simple currency of kindness and hard work. It all felt like a story from another lifetime, a fairy tale read to a foolish old woman who had dared to believe she still had a place in the world. In that moment, sitting in the most beautiful restaurant I had ever seen, I had never felt so utterly, devastatingly alone. The silence from my son, seated just 3 feet away, was the final twisting turn of the knife. I don't know how long I sat there, entombed in that suffocating silence. It might have been 5 minutes or 50. Time had lost its meaning. My world had shrunk to the space between my own 2 hands, which I had clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from trembling. I was intensely aware of everything and nothing at all. I could feel the stares from the adjacent tables, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. I could hear Amanda's light, carefree laughter as she recounted an amusing anecdote to Liam, her voice a jarring counterpoint to the howling emptiness in my heart. Liam, for his part, did not speak. He just sat there, a handsome, well-dressed statue, occasionally nodding as his wife spoke. I was contemplating the mechanics of leaving. How does one stand up and walk away when one has been declared invisible? Would I simply fade through the walls? I decided I would just place my napkin on the table, stand, and walk toward the exit without a word. It would be a quiet surrender, a final, dignified retreat from a battle I had never stood a chance of winning. It was in that moment, as I was gathering the last of my courage, that a new energy entered the room. It was a subtle shift at first, a ripple of movement near the back of the restaurant, by a discreet door I hadn't noticed before, one that likely led to the management offices. A man emerged, walking quickly, his face a mask of controlled panic. He was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharply tailored suit that spoke of authority. He moved with a purpose that cut through the relaxed, opulent atmosphere of the dining room. My mind, foggy with shame, took a moment to place him, and then it clicked. It was Jean-Pierre Dubois. He had been a young, ambitious apprentice chef in our bakery, the Rolling Pin, for a single, memorable summer more than 20 years ago. He was a culinary prodigy, but he'd had a wild streak. Frank had taken him under his wing, not just teaching him about pastries, but about discipline, about respect for ingredients, and about the quiet dignity of a hard day's work. I remembered Jean-Pierre as a good boy, a little lost, but with a fundamentally decent heart. The last I'd heard, he'd gone on to make a big name for himself in the culinary world. I had no idea he was here. His eyes were scanning the room, a frantic search for someone or something. I saw his gaze pass over our table, and for a second I thought he might recognize me. But his eyes moved on, and my heart sank a little further. Of course he wouldn't recognize me. I was just a ghost in a plum-colored dress. Amanda, however, saw his presence as an opportunity. She sat up a little straighter, a practiced, welcoming smile gracing her lips. For the general manager of Le Ciel Étoilé to be in the dining room was an event, and she clearly expected him to make his way to their table to pay his respects. "Look, it's Mr. Dubois," she murmured to Liam, a note of excitement in her voice. He must have heard we were here. But Mr. Dubois was not looking for them. His frantic search continued until his eyes landed on a junior manager near the hostess stand. He strode over, and I could just make out his low, urgent voice. "Where is she?" "The reservation was for Vance. The system shows she's checked in. Find her. Now." My blood ran cold. Vance, my name, Frank's name. What was happening? The junior manager, looking flustered, pointed a trembling finger directly at our table. Mr. Dubois turned. His eyes followed the pointing finger, and this time they did not move on. They locked onto me. The expression on his face was a chaotic masterpiece of emotion. I saw recognition dawn, followed by utter disbelief, which was then instantly consumed by a wave of something that looked like pure, unadulterated horror. He went pale. For a moment, he seemed frozen, as if he'd seen an apparition. And then he started moving, not strolling, not walking, but striding directly toward our table with an intensity that silenced the room. Conversations faltered. Forks and knives paused mid-air. Every eye in Le Ciel Étoilé turned to follow the manager on his determined path. Amanda, utterly oblivious, mistook his intensity for eagerness to greet her. She beamed, raising her hand for a delicate wave. "Jean-Pierre," she began, using his first name with an air of unearned familiarity. "So lovely to see you." He didn't even hear her. His eyes were fixed on me, and as he drew closer, I could see the genuine anguish in them. He stopped beside our table, but he didn't address Amanda or Liam. He turned to me. And then, in the middle of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, in front of everyone, Jean-Pierre Dubois, the master of this glittering domain, bowed. Not a polite nod, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, a gesture of profound and unmistakable respect. The entire restaurant seemed to gasp as one. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mix of reverence and frantic apology. "Madam, please, you must forgive me. I was in a meeting, my phone was off. I just saw the security footage from the front desk camera. The treatment you have received in this establishment, it is a disgrace, it is unforgivable." "Madam?" The word hung in the air, charged and heavy. Amanda's smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned confusion. "What did you just call her?" she demanded, her voice a harsh squawk. "What are you talking about? She's nobody." Mr. Dubois slowly straightened up, but his back was rigid with a fury I had never seen in the young boy I once knew. His face, when he turned to Amanda, was glacial. "Nobody?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Whitman, The woman you just publicly humiliated, the woman you instructed my staff to ignore, is Eleanor Vance. She is the widow of my greatest mentor, Frank Vance, the man who taught me that kindness is a more essential ingredient than saffron or truffles. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Amanda looked stunned into silence. But she is not just Frank Vance's widow, he continued, his voice rising, resonating with a power that commanded the attention of every person in the room. The bakery she and her husband built, the Rolling Pin, was more than just a shop. It was a local institution, a place of warmth and excellence. When they sold the business and retired, Mrs. Vance, wanting to preserve Frank's legacy of quality and service, did not put her money in the stock market. She took every penny of her life savings, every ounce of her faith, and she invested it all to become the silent, founding partner of this very restaurant. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the shocked faces in the room before landing back on me. "This woman isn't just a guest here," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "She is the heart, the soul, and the sole owner of Le Ciel Étoilé." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so deep, so profound, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Amanda's face was a grotesque caricature of disbelief, her perfectly painted mouth hanging open. Liam looked as if he had been physically struck, his eyes wide, darting from me to Mr. Dubois and back again, the pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed violently clicking into place in his mind. And me? I just sat there, the invisible woman, the empty chair, suddenly feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, not with pity, but with a dawning, electrifying awe. The ghost had just become the queen. For a long moment, the only sound in the entire restaurant was the frantic beating of my own heart. The words "the sole owner of Le Ciel Étoilé" seemed to hang in the air, shimmering, impossible. It was a truth I had kept hidden for years, a quiet pact I'd made with Frank's memory. We had never been people who sought the spotlight. The investment was meant to be a silent one, a way to ensure the principles we lived by, quality, kindness, respect, could continue to flourish, even after we were gone. I never wanted to be a part of this glittering world. I only wanted to ensure a small piece of our simple, decent world existed within it. Amanda was the first to break the spell. She let out a choked, incredulous laugh. That's absurd," she stammered, looking at Mr. Dubois as if he'd gone mad. She lives on a pension in a tiny apartment. This is some kind of sick joke." Mr. Dubois' expression hardened into granite. "The only joke here, Miss Whitman, is that you believe a person's worth is measured by the size of their house. I have the incorporation documents in my office, signed by Mrs. Vance herself. This restaurant was built on the foundation of her integrity, a foundation you have spent the entire evening trying to demolish." His gaze then shifted, moving past Amanda, and landed on Marco, the waiter, who was hovering near a service station, frozen in a state of pure terror, his face the color of spoiled milk. "You!" Mr. Dubois' voice was no longer loud, but a low, menacing growl that was far more terrifying. "Marco, step forward." The young man approached the table as if walking to the gallows. He was trembling, his arrogant smirk replaced by a pathetic, quivering fear. He couldn't look at me. "Do you know the first rule of this establishment?" Mr. Dubois asked, his voice dangerously calm. "It is not the customer is always right. It is every person who walks through that door is to be treated with dignity. A rule set by Mrs. Vance's late husband himself. You didn't just fail to bring a guest a glass of water. You participated in an act of cruelty. You laughed at the woman who signs your paycheck. You have disgraced the uniform you wear and the memory of the good man who inspired this place. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Get your things and get out of my sight." Marco opened his mouth, a desperate squeak escaping, but no words came. With a final mortified glance at Amanda, he turned and practically fled toward the kitchens, disappearing from view. Justice had been swift, absolute, and public. Mr. Dubois then turned his attention to my son. His voice, when he spoke to Liam, was not filled with anger, but with a profound, aching disappointment. "And you, Liam. I remember you as a little boy, your face always smudged with flour, running through the rolling pin. Your mother and father worked their fingers to the bone to give you a life they never had. They taught you kindness, they taught you character, and you sat here in silence while your own mother was stripped of her dignity. Frank would be ashamed of you tonight. Every word was a hammer blow. Liam visibly flinched, shrinking in his seat, the full weight of his cowardice finally crashing down upon him. He buried his face in his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Finally, Mr. Dubois turned back to me. The fury in his face melted away, replaced by the same earnest respect I remembered from the young apprentice chef all those years ago. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice soft again. "Eleanor, what do you wish for me to do? The entire restaurant is at your command." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The years of quiet grief, of feeling small and insignificant, of allowing myself to be defined by my loss, fell away. I felt the spirit of Frank beside me, his steady, gentle strength flowing into me. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a ghost. I was Eleanor Vance, and this was my house. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I looked at Amanda, who was now staring at me with a new expression. Raw, terrified calculation. She was no longer seeing a poor old woman, but the gatekeeper to the world she so desperately coveted. I then looked at my son, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood up. My legs felt strong and steady. "Thank you, Jean-Pierre," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, resonating in the hushed dining room. "You have already done more than enough. You have honored my husband's memory, and for that, I am eternally grateful." I turned to Amanda. "You were right about one thing, Amanda," I began, and she flinched as if I'd struck her. "You said I was poor. And for a long time, especially after Frank died, I felt poor. I felt diminished, but my poverty was never in my bank account. It was in my spirit. I allowed people like you to make me feel small. That ends tonight." "The greatest lesson Frank ever taught me," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "was that true wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you give. It's the kindness you show when no one is watching. It's the respect you offer to those who can do nothing for you. It is a currency you know nothing about. You live in a beautiful, expensive, and utterly impoverished world." I let my words hang in the air for a moment before turning to my son. "Liam," I said gently, the anger draining away, leaving only a mother's sorrow. "We will talk later. You have a great deal to think about concerning the kind of man you want to be, the man your father raised you to be." Finally, I faced Mr. Dubois. A sense of purpose, clearer than any I had felt in 5 years, began to form in my mind. The quiet life was over. Frank's legacy, our legacy, was more than just a silent investment. It was an active responsibility. "Jean-Pierre," I said, "I have been an absent owner for too long. This place, this beautiful restaurant, it has my husband's name on the incorporation papers, but it seems to have lost his soul. You and I are going to change that." A brilliant, relieved smile broke across his face. "Whatever you need, Eleanor, I am at your service." "Good," I said. "We'll start on Monday morning. I want to review everything. Staff training, our community charity programs, everything. From now on, Le Ciel Étoilé will not be known for its prices, but for its principles. We will be the finest restaurant in this city, not because we are the most expensive, but because we are the kindest." I looked around the room, at the faces of the wealthy patrons watching me with rapt attention. I was no longer an outsider, I was the center. I had found my voice, my strength, my purpose, all in the place I had dreaded most. Without another glance at the wreckage of the table, I turned to leave. "Jean-Pierre, if you would be so kind as to call a taxi for me." "Absolutely not, Madam Owner," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "The house car will be taking you home." As I walked toward the great brass doors, the diners who had watched my humiliation now watched my departure with expressions of awe and respect. A few of them even began to applaud a soft, scattered sound at first, which then grew into a warm, sustained ovation. I walked out of that restaurant not as the shamed old woman who had entered, but as the woman I was always meant to be, the woman Frank always knew I was. That night, Amanda tried to teach me a lesson about my place in the world, and in the end, she did. She taught me that my place was not in the shadows, but at the head of the table. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments below. Your voice, believe me, always matters.